I'm concerned that the United States is going through something like a rolling authoritarian takeover. There's a lot of sort of big language out there. Is this sort of like America's fascist moment? Is Trump like Mussolini? I don't want to go down that route. I'm not actually an expert in theory or fascism. I don't want to go that far, but I do think that the Trump administration is trying to govern the United States in the way that Viktor Orban has governed Hungary.
Hi, I'm Fergus Macphee, and welcome to the Trump Report on Times Radio. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on our YouTube channel, and you can also listen and follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Joining me today is Professor Bob Kelly, political analyst and Professor of International Relations at Pusan National University. Bob, thank you for joining us on the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me again.
So we'll start today with the government shutdown, which has, of course, dominated the news in Washington this week. And the White House has said that mass layoffs will be imminent, with Donald Trump describing this as an opportunity to make what might be sort of more longer-lasting cuts. Caroline Leavitt said these could be in the thousands. Now, we know that his administration has been quite keen on public sector layoffs sort of since taking office. So is this the perfect opportunity for them to do so, I guess?
Yeah, I think so. The cuts back in sort of February, so March, April, sort of Doge and Musk, those were kind of controversial. We know now over the summer that a number of people were rehired in places like weather forecasting and stuff like that. But this, of course, is a better, sort of more durable excuse, I suppose, right? If you see it as entirely pretextual, this is a better option. But I think on the other hand, I think it's pretty well established now that the Republican Party under Donald Trump in this term really does want to significantly shrink the size of the federal workforce. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the Democrats aren't compromising on this. I think because the perception is that, 8 months in, Trump has been cutting a lot anyway, right? And so, even if we give him what he wants on this, he's still going to cut if he really wants to, right? I mean, we know that he was very near the edges of federal law with some of these things. There have been a lot of lawsuits regarding the RIFs earlier in the year. And so I think that's why the Democrats are sort of holding firm on this, just in terms of the sheer politics of it, because they believe that the Republicans would do this if they wanted to anyway. And therefore, there's no reason not to hold out for subsidies on Obamacare or, maybe a reduction in the tariffs or something like that.
You mentioned the lawsuits there. It's something we've covered quite a lot on the show. Lawsuits kind of almost are part of White House policy. I think on one show I said that there's currently sort of about 305 live cases.
Something like that, yeah.
So in this case, with the shutdown, if they were to sort of make thousands of layoffs as they sort of teased, I mean, could that be the subject of another lawsuit then?
I would imagine so. I mean, it's worth pointing out to your viewers, especially non-Americans, it's worth maybe pointing out that the idea of government shutdowns as a tool to reorganize the budget, to reorganize the U.S. Federal workforce, that's pretty recent, right? I mean, we didn't really have substantial regular threats of government shutdowns until the mid-1990s, until Newt Gingrich became Speaker of the House. I mean, this gets kind of historical and wonky here, but it's only been about 30 years or so. And these don't happen often enough. And they're often so politicized that there's no sense of proper procedure, sort of like what the rules of this are, right? I mean, there's not some kind of established precedent. These things they often sort of get played out in the media rather than the courts. And so if the reduction, I presume we'll get to that. So if this really does tilt towards, 3 or 4% of the federal government gets sort of laid off, like 100,000 workers or something. I mean, I don't know what the Trump people have in mind, but I mean, if it really is dramatic, my sense is that yes, it will wind up in the courts. I mean, certainly just the people who lose their jobs are going to want to complain. I would imagine that alone, but that would be a significantly greater step than we have seen in the past with shutdowns. It's not, the shutdowns are so abnormal and they're so new. They're not really a part of constitutional practice. They're not actually anywhere sort of written down. There's no like rule book that you open. I mean, the government agencies kind of wing. No, really. I mean, I actually used to work for Congress back in the 1990s before I went to graduate school. And this was always kind of looming over the budget discussions. And nobody really quite knew what the rules were. You kind of feel your way through, it gets fought out in the media, and then it usually gets resolved within 6 weeks. The Trump administration is a good deal more ideological than its predecessors. And its willingness to fire federal employees en masse is much greater than in the past. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I think this won't just go through the media and be sort of a CNN kind of fight, if you will, that if the reductions in force are really large, then it will wind up in the courts. And it's just not clear what the jurisprudence even is on that. I would the courts are probably going to feel their way through just like the rest of us.
It's the first one in 7 years. I guess they are semi-abnormal, but they do seem to happen more in the US than other places.
Right. So I guess they are now becoming sort of constitutional practice. Yeah.
I just want to move on slightly because on Wednesday, and as Donald Trump often does, he took to Truth Social, and I'm going to read you the post that he wrote. He said, this is part of a longer post. He said, I have a meeting today with Russ Fort, he of Project 2025 fame, to determine which of the many Democrat agencies, most of which are a political scam, he recommends to be cut, and whether or not those cuts will be temporary or permanent. Now, before the election, the president liked to distance himself from Project 2025. This sounds like it's that in action.
Yes. I don't want to be too partisan or ideological here, but yes, to be honest, in my opinion, the president's distancing from 2025 last year was a fake. It was a maneuver. It was, if you want to be blunt, quite honest, it was a lie. It's pretty clear that Project 2025 had a lot of previous Trump staffers from the first term, that a lot of the Make America Great Again, America First movement around Trump, MAGA, that a lot of the people in that orbit around Trump and Mar-a-Lago and whatnot had filled the think tanks that were relevant to this, particularly the Heritage Foundation. I think this is all pretty well understood at this point. And once that actually became sort of public and people began to actually read it, like regular folks began to hear about it on Twitter and CNN or the New York Times or whatever, the negative publicity around it was really high, and Trump backed away from it. But I mean, there was a substantial block of analysts on the left of center, I suppose. I think I said this on Twitter myself a year ago, that it probably wasn't true, that the Trumpers were pretty ideological about American government. They really had a sense of like what the American government ought to look like, and they were writing it down. To their credit, by the way, right? I mean, we often sort of criticize MAGA as being sort of anti-intellectual and sort of undisciplined, but I mean, to their credit, they actually did write it all down. You could read it, and it was quite long too, right? I think where the real problem is that Trump disavowed it when I think most analysts thought that was a lie or sort of a maneuver. And yeah, so here we are. And I think a lot of left of center analysts at least probably aren't too surprised that this is in fact the case. But yes, my sense is that 2025 is in fact the blueprint, at least for the first year. We'll see. Next year, I mean, I don't want to get down this rabbit hole too much, but if there's a big backlash and we know that Trump's approval rating is now below 40%, the midterms are coming up. If it looks like the Republicans are going to get washed out next year, and if Trump's approval rating hovers around like 35, I mean, that's awfully low. Trump might start to backtrack. That's what normally happens with presidents, right? They come in, they got some big agenda. It's like, I'm going to change everything. And then it turns out to be unpopular after a year and a half. People start to complain about this or that. And then presidents kind of pull back. Trump is more ideological than his predecessor, so I'm not sure if he'll do that. But that's sort of happened in the past. George W. Bush is a nice example of that, right? Very neoconservative, ideological in the first term, and then kind of more centrist in the second.
We won't look ahead too much and make predictions, but do you think that's likely in the midterms next year? Because like obviously I'm in the UK, but I think some of the feeling that we get on this side of the pond from the media is that the Democrats are in a little bit of a mess themselves.
They are. I mean, what we know in political science, though, about U.S. elections is that they are, the term that we use in political science is they are thermostatic, which is to say that sort of party A gets elected, right? They got a big sort of mandate. That's what it looks like. Obama gets elected, and he's going to like save everything and fix everything. People love him. And then once he actually starts to govern, he has to make choices, and some of those choices affect people in ways they don't like, and so public opinion begins to turn against him. Right? I mean, this is kind of inevitable, right? So presidents usually start with a high approval rating, and then it goes down and down and down. And then in the midterm election, in the congressional midterm election, 2 years after the president gets elected, you get a backlash, and they vote for the other party. Again, this is this idea of thermostatic, right? That it always kind of tilts back towards the center. You get this kind of equilibration effect. And that I don't see any particular reason why that wouldn't happen here. If anything, it's probably going to be more accentuated because Trump is very ideological, right? I mean, Trump has really got he's pretty tough on the conservative ideology, and that would presumably provoke a big backlash on the left. I think the only real question out there is whether or not Trump might in some way corrupt or rig the election. I think there's a lot of concern out there that Trump realizes that that American public opinion is turning against him, and so you might see sort of purges of voter rolls. You might see the sending the army or the National Guard into blue cities, having them sort of hover around voting locations to suppress the vote. There is a fair amount of concern, at least in my field of political science, that Trump is going down this kind of Orban style path, right, where you start to use the powers of the state to tilt elections in favor of the incumbents. That's my big concern. As long as the elections are free and fair and relatively openly competitive, I think yes, the Democrats are going to win substantially next year.
You are you sort of alluding to the meeting that Trump and Hegseth had with the generals? Because I know you posted on X recently this week, and I think you ended it said it sort of sounds like almost a military almost sounds like a military occupation.
I am increasingly concerned about that. I'm a little wary about saying this too publicly, but I am I am concerned that the United States is going through something like a rolling authoritarian takeover. I mean, there's a lot of sort of big language out there. Is this sort of like America's fascist moment? Is Trump like Mussolini? I don't want to go down that route. I'm not actually an expert in theory or fascism. I don't want to go that far, but I do think that the Trump administration is trying to govern the United States in the way that Viktor Orban has governed Hungary, right? I mean, your European audience probably recognize that reference. Where you tilt the playing field politically towards the incumbent enough that even though you still have elections, procedurally, you're still democratic. In practice, the elections become less free and less fair because the state controls airtime, for example, because in the case of the Americans, the state run by MAGA can deploy the U.S. military or the National Guard onto the streets, which will, as you might imagine, intimidate people. And I think that's the concern, is that the Republican Party is openly politicizing the American states or stripping away the neutrality. We just saw, I think, Russell Vought himself saying on Twitter that like certain energy projects or transportation projects in blue states wouldn't be funded. That's kind of raw politicization that we associate with authoritarian takeovers of the state. That's the kind of thing that we've seen in Russia and in Hungary and in Turkey. And I think there, again, sort of within political science, and I think also broadly speaking on the left in the United States, I think there is this real concern that Trump is engaging in something like that. I'm a little wary about saying this too much. I'm hoping the courts will kind of slow down the president, but he's moving awfully fast, and it certainly looks authoritarian.
Would his actions this week fall into that category at all? One of the things he said was that he's quite keen during the shutdown to clear out the deadwood of Democrat agencies. I mean, do you have any idea what that constitutes, like what those agencies might be?
Well, traditionally, the Democratic Party in the United States has supported, broadly speaking, the welfare state, by which we mean things like the Department of Transportation or Health and Human Services or Housing and Urban Development. These services often, in practice, redistribute wealth downward, which is to say that you sort of take money from sort of wealthier people and you spend it on sort of healthcare for poor people and building roads in poor neighborhoods where people couldn't afford it locally and stuff like that. And and the thing is, there's actually, I think this is one reason why Trump's approval rating is kind of low. I mean, there's a kind of broad consensus for these kinds of things. If you actually look at the way Americans talk about healthcare, there is a general consensus in the United States that nobody should be left like dying on a sidewalk in front of a hospital. I mean, Americans don't actually want that, right? There's a big debate over how it should be funded, but the idea that Americans don't support national health care is incorrect, and that's why Obamacare got passed 15 years ago. And I think, yeah, we're kind of waiting to see what exactly Trump means by that. What agencies, public agencies, does Trump, as president, and Russell Vought, which ones do they interpret as being Democratic or serving Democratic constituencies? I would imagine that would be things related to sort of civil rights, for example. Right, it's pretty clear that this administration wants to shut down any and all civil rights investigations, legislation, and so on. Things may be related to Indian affairs, anything at all remotely related to homosexuality, DEI, women's rights. I would imagine that HUD, Housing Urban Development, for example, might be one of these places where I would imagine that there's zero sympathy within Project 2025 and Trump's movement. And that could be a place where maybe you could cut the workforce dramatically. But again, the president's pretty vague on that, so I don't know.
Both sides, Republican and Democrat, have of course continued to sort of blame each other for this shutdown. I don't necessarily want to get into that question of who's at fault, but in terms of who it's going to affect more, if you get into a slinging match with Donald Trump, it doesn't normally end well. This is going to hurt the Democrats, right?
Traditionally, the party in the White House is the one that is tarred. I mean, it's sort of fought out in the media, but I would imagine actually that because the Republican Party controls the House, the Senate, and the White House, that it will end up rebounding to against Donald Trump. Now, Trump is great at media manipulation. I mean, Trump is really a master of social media and intent. You're right. I mean, your profession, you guys certainly know that, right? Or you'll know better than me. So, I mean, I think it's possible that Trump could actually probably spin this in a way much better than his predecessors who were less media savvy than him. But I would imagine that given that what we know about sort of like past perceptions of sort of like where the blame fell, and the fact that the Republicans have the trifecta, that's the term that we use in American politics for the three. I would imagine that at least initially the blame will go with the Republican Party.
Mm. And we know what Donald Trump's trying to make out of it. We've just spent sort of 15 minutes talking about it. He's sort of telling us in black and white. What is the Democrat strategy here?
Yeah, the Democrats are really sort of adrift, right? I mean, everybody's pointed this out over the last 8 months. The Democrats are just kind of overwhelmed by this Project 2025 offensive, if that's what you want to call it, maybe, and they don't really know quite how to respond. Certainly, I think if Charles Schumer and Jeffries cannot find some kind of strategy to make this look like some kind of victory for the Democrats, if they can't sort of claw anything out of the White House, I would imagine they'll face leadership challenges next year. I mean, the Democratic response to Trumpism this year has been, I think, pretty shockingly limp. Right? Again, I don't know. I'm sort of more of a political scientist. I'm not really sort of too engaged the way that I used to be. But I think there's a sort of general sense out there from sort of like, at least in political science, that the balance of powers system, separation of powers, sort of the pushback of an opposition party has been remarkably underpowered this time around. That the kind of traditional pushback you see from opposition parties in the United States has really been missing this year. And my sense is that's feeding through again if you look at Trump's approval rating. And I would imagine that if the Democratic leadership in Congress cannot make some hay out of this shutdown, if it turns out to be that you are correct, the Democrats get blamed for it, I would imagine that coupled to the last 8 months of sort of drift in the Congress, where it looks like the Democrats in Congress just can't get it. They can't stop these ICE raids, right? And you're seeing video of sort of like masked ICE guys like throwing people out of the houses. I mean, the Democrats can't do anything about that in Congress, right? And you got to figure that the leadership is at some point going to be troubled and challenged. And I think the shutdown is sort of a real juncture here, right? Because I mean, if the Democrats can't get anything out of the Republicans on the budget, then they won't get anything at all. I mean, this is their big moment, right? Because the government's got to operate, right? And people want the government to function. People need, they want to make sure that their social security checks are going to arrive, that they get their passport on time so they can go on vacation. All these things require government operation. And so this is an opportunity for the Democrats to really get some traction. And like, as you're pointing out, I'm actually kind of surprised they haven't. I'm actually surprised that this is actually going for the Republicans better than it normally would, I think, given what we've seen in previous shutdowns. And my own sense is, I mean, I'm not a Democrat here or anything like that. My own sense is that a lot of it is a leadership issue. That Jeffries and Schumer have just been not up to the challenge.
Well, we'll hold that thought on who it's maybe playing better for. We'll just one more question on this, because at time of recording, they are expected to hold another vote this afternoon to break the impasse. Are you at all hopeful for that vote? And I guess the question is, whose interest is it in more to stop this shutdown?
So no, I'm not hopeful. I think the Democrats, again, because of the perception that Trump has just been sort of rolling along for 8 months and sort of basically doing whatever he wants, issuing executive orders instead of going to Congress. I think there's a sense out there on the left that this is it, right? And if you don't get anything out of Trump on the budget, you're basically not going to get anything, right? So I mean, this is the hill you're going to die on. This is where you plant your flag. And so the Democrats, I think, have made it pretty reasonably clear that they want this gets wonky. They want subsidies for Obamacare, or perhaps as a second order thing, movement on the tariffs. And if Trump doesn't give them that, I mean, there's just no reason to vote for the budget, right? I mean, there's supposed to be a budget negotiation, right? Where the Trump administration gives a little bit and the Democrats give them their vote. And as best I can tell from the news, just same as you, it doesn't look like the Trump people want to do that at all. They just kind of want to roll right through and steamroll the Democrats. If that's the case, then, which they've been doing already for 8 months, I mean, if you're the Democrats, why would you vote for that? And again, that's why I was sort of making this argument before, that I think they're kind of this is something of a critical juncture. If the Democratic leadership can't sort of figure out how to use this moment when they actually have some genuine leverage before the media and people are paying attention, then I think that the Democratic leadership is probably going to get challenged in the following year.
But ultimately, it's American people and American policies that suffer. Like, I mean, literally this morning, key US job data won't be released because of the shutdown, and there's even fears that weapon shipments to Ukraine might not get there on time.
That sounds right.
Okay, we'll just move on to something a little bit different, because Epstein has sort of been out of the news for maybe the past couple of weeks. But earlier this week, Trump ally and US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick suggested that Jeffrey Epstein may have blackmailed his high-profile friends with secret recordings of them receiving massages. He described the deceased sex offender and paedophile as the greatest blackmailer ever. Now, as we always mention on this show, there's no suggestion of any wrongdoing by Donald Trump, and he's never officially been accused of any crimes in regards to his relationship with Epstein. But I can't imagine that he would find this interjection from Howard Lutnick very helpful.
I think there's a pretty wide consensus outside of MAGA that Trump is probably all over the Epstein files, and that's the reason why you're getting so much misdirection. He's acting like someone who's got an awful lot to hide. And I think because of that, eventually I think these things will come out, right? I mean, even the identity of Deep Throat from Watergate eventually came out. At some point, this is going to come out. I think probably the most interesting question is, will it come out in Donald Trump's lifetime, right? Donald Trump is almost 80, right? So, I mean, mortality is coming, shall we say. And, I think that's sort of the bigger question, right? Can they keep this under wraps while Trump is still president? But I would imagine that it's such a big thing. It's such a big story. Everybody's paid attention to it. Everybody outside of MAGA thinks that Trump is in there, right? And, at some point, something is going to leak. Something's going to break just because the demand is so high.
Yeah, you do think so? Because we're sort of getting this drip feed of information, but you think at some point there will be, floodgates open, we'll get a lot more.
I do. And that, because, the best sort of parallel, I guess, we have would be things like Watergate and Iran-Contra. And in time, all of that information came out, right? Which the principals who were part of it were afraid about getting blamed, right? As sort of time moved on, they were sort of tarred in the research and the writing, the media retrospectives and stuff like that. And so they wanted to clear their name. And so they went out and started talking to journalists and saying, well, this is actually what really happened, right? And we saw this in Watergate. And I would imagine the same thing here, right? That the further we get from this thing, there are going to be people around Trump who are going to be blamed for sort of helping to sort of repress the Epstein files. And people are going to say, hey, I didn't want to, be responsible for this. I'm not trying to prevent, cover up a pedophile, and they'll start leaking. So even if it doesn't come out now, the attention around it is so massive that, I would imagine, again, I think the big issue is, does it come out in Trump's lifetime or during his presidency, in which case it would probably explode into something akin to Watergate. I mean, given how much has been built up, if Trump is actually named in a meaningful way, it will be pretty explosive.
Just one comment on, do you think Howard Lutnick was trying to be helpful? Because, like I said, if I was Donald Trump, it's finally left the news agenda, and then here you are bringing it up in an interview about 4 days later.
So I think the thing about a lot of the people around Donald Trump is that they're actually not well versed, well trained, well experienced political hands in Washington, D.C., and they often sort of stumble into saying things they don't really intend to. Presumably Lutnick was trying to, he doesn't want to, he wants to keep his job. He didn't intend to say something that would get Donald Trump in trouble. But I mean, we've seen this with people like Pete Hegseth and Pam Bondi. I mean, they go on TV and they're just not ready for the job. They're just kind of out of their depth, and they say all this crazy stuff. So like Hegseth just said 2 days ago, like, the rules of engagement are stupid, which is basically sort of telling the U.S. military should go commit war crimes. I mean, oh my God, right? I mean, that's all over Twitter. I mean, everybody's talking. In my field, people are talking about it. And I think that's what you see here. Lutnick, just like a lot of these people around Donald Trump, is just, he's a third stringer. And we know that Trump is recruiting for loyalty, not merit. And so you're going to get these kinds of failures and these kinds of faux pas in the media, because he's just not surrounded by the people he was in the first term. The adults in the room and all that.
That's certainly a phrase we've been familiar here with our governments in the UK as well. We will just end then with Lisa Cook, because the Supreme Court has ruled that she can stay on as Federal Reserve Governor for now. Just one question: does that have any bearing on the expected sort of case they're going to hear for the tariffs next month?
So the Supreme Court did say a few months ago in one of its rulings, I can't recall the name, that the Federal Reserve was somewhat exempted from the unitary executive theory, right? That you couldn't sort of replace these people. And there was I follow some law blogs and stuff in political science, and a lot of people were saying it was like, this is just a made up thing. They just ring fence the Federal Reserve because they're like trying to watch out for their stock portfolios and stuff like that. But I mean, but the Trump administration did and the Supreme Court did sort of lay down that red line, and it looks like they're trying to enforce it, right? I mean, if you fully believe in the unitary executive theory, then yeah, I mean, I suppose Trump should be allowed to replace the committee entirely, the Federal Open Market Committee. But I think the court and a lot of other people, a lot of Wall Street people, a lot of the wealthier people around Donald Trump, and a lot of people in his cabinet are quite wealthy. They know what happens if you start to politicize the Federal Reserve, right? I mean, just look at hyperinflation in Latin America and places like that, right? We know, and so I think that's one of the reasons why the court sort of desisted on the Cook thing, and that she has been left in place. And my guess is that the Trump people really push this. This might actually be the wall that they collide into. I mean, there's been a lot of debate out there, like when is the Supreme Court going to draw a red line? And corrupting the Federal Reserve, I think, will be very widely seen by the U.S. business community and a lot of America's partners around the world as a bridge too far. And I think a lot of the people on the court know this too. And so I think the really interesting thing intellectually for people in my business is what kind of rationale will the Supreme Court be able to spin up that sort of makes the Supreme Court, the Federal Reserve, distinct from all these other agencies that were suddenly placed under the president's authority? And yeah, nobody really knows if they can pull it off. And so it's going to look kind of like saving your stock portfolio. But I mean, at least it's a line in the sand. I mean, at least it's sort of like telling the Trump people there are limits to how far you can go.
Well, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. Because do you think Donald Trump is at all surprised, and are you at all surprised that perhaps the Supreme Court currently isn't finding in his favor, maybe as much as he might have thought?
If there was any place there was going to be a red line, it was probably on the Federal Reserve, given the massive impact it would have on not just on the markets, but to be perfectly blunt, on the wealth of the wealthiest people in the United States. I mean, the United States has become, I don't want to get into this too much, but the United States has become extraordinarily unequal. Inequality has grown in the United States substantially in the last 45 years, right? And Donald Trump really enjoys being around very wealthy people. He has a lot of very wealthy people in his cabinet, and they have his ear. And for them, the integrity of their stock portfolio, if you will, is genuinely important. And credible information coming from the U.S. government about inflation, unemployment, right, technocratic control over the interest rate, that those are really key, important issues for the wealthiest people in the United States, along with the rest of us. You know, I have money in the stock market too, but I mean, if you're really wealthy, these are pretty core issues, right? And I would imagine the people around Trump are saying that this is, this is a bridge too far, and it sounds like that includes the court. But if they give way on that, then I mean, I don't know. It's hard to argue for not giving way on anything else, sort of like firing the entire janitorial staff at the Department of Commerce or something like that, right? I mean, if you give him the Federal Reserve, then I'm not really sure what's left.
Bob Kelly, thank you so much for joining us on the Trump Report.
Thank you for having me.